Hello there. Today I'll be providing a demonstration of the ESG-CV subrecipient and expense and voucher tool and the ESG-CV recipient expense tracking tool. These companion tools can be used to detail and track ESG-CV expenses from subrecipient incurrence and reimbursement requests to recipient disbursement tracking and reporting. They can be used as is or modified to reflect recipient and subrecipient policies and procedures. I'll begin with the ESG subrecipient expense and voucher tool. With this tool, subrecipients can list and categorize expenses, create reimbursement requests, and track project spending. Recipients can use the information for the reimbursement request to track overall expenses and report to HUD. I'll begin with tab 1, side A, expense register inputs. You can see a variety of cell styles in the legend. The red category indicates ESG components like rapid rehousing, homelessness prevention, or street outreach. The dark blue category indicates ESG activity categories under specific components. These are set up the same way as the ESG-CV SAGE expense categories that are required for ESG-CV quarterly reporting. Light blue cells have totaling formulas, and yellow cells indicate the section of the expense register summary that can be transferred into a parallel section on the reimbursement request or voucher tabs. Side A of the expense register inputs begins with detailed instructions. These instruction rows are grouped and can be minimized by selecting the minus sign on the left axis of the spreadsheet. At the top of the expense register input table, there are a few rows underneath the gray header where subrecipients can input organizational and timing information. The table itself is sized appropriately for printing, and if widths are not adjusted, should print with a table width of 1 page. This table, the expense register inputs, is designed for subrecipients to input individual expenses that are being charged to the ESG-CV grant as they are incurred. There are 8 columns with green headers. The first 4 columns allow subrecipients to input information tied to a particular expense, such as date, check number, payee, and description. The following 3 columns are set up with drop-down menus that the subrecipient can use to classify costs according to ESG component and select from homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing through the list, and then cost category, which again is consistent with the SAGE category and traditional ESG activity categories. As you can see under rapid rehousing, the various activity categories available for drop-down. And then by subcategory, which indicates the allowable cost under a particular activity. The expense amount is input into the final column, and the pink shaded cell above the last 2 columns automatically tracks the total expenses input through the table. The table is currently set up with example expenses from a rapid rehousing program. To demonstrate, I will add another expense so that you can see the process as it is completed. Dates can be input, check numbers, a payee, as you can see in the examples, and then the components drop-downs are available under the component column. And the cost category will populate a drop-down connected to the component that was selected in the previous column. So I'll add relocation and stabilization services service costs for legal services under this program and add an additional $5,000. Tab 1, side B is called the expense register summary. Side B automatically tracks total expenses by component and cost category as individual expenses are recorded in side A. The table inside B is organized by ESG component. See the red headers throughout the table. The cost category, which again is also the activity and SAGE category, is organized by dark blue headers, subheaders throughout the table. And then allowable costs under each activity or cost category are listed in the white cells beneath it. The blue rows are totaling rows, which will reflect the total assigned to the allowable costs beneath it. So everything input as a rental application fee through moving costs will total under relocation and stabilization services financial costs. When the subrecipient has recorded all expenses for the period on side A in the expense register input table, those expenses will be completely summarized in side B in the expense register summary that you see now. And the total at the very bottom of the table on side B will match the total at the top of the expense register input table. So as you can see in the expense register summary, all the costs input and tagged as rapid rehousing costs in the input table have been summarized by their allowable costs as well as the activity category. Once all these expenses are recorded, recipients will then use the summary table to transfer expense information by component into the Reimbursement Request tab for the relevant period. This transfer process will be discussed further below after an explanation for the Reimbursement Request tab is provided. I will now go to the second tab, which is the Reimbursement Request tab for the first period. Each of these subsequent tabs are structured as reimbursement or voucher requests for specific periods. Side A is the voucher request, and side B is a voucher request summary structured in a way that allows the data to be easily transferred to the recipient's overall expense tracking tool, which is the companion tool to this tool. Side B requires no action from the subrecipient other than making sure the summary totals are accurate after the subrecipient has completed side A. As you can see, the reimbursement request on side A is laid out in the same way as the expense register summary on tab 1, allowing for the easy transfer of expense data. There are only two inputting actions that a subrecipient must take on this tab. First, the subrecipient must complete the budget column by inputting the budgeted amounts by category consistent with their subrecipient agreement budget, as you can see completed under the rapid rehousing component in this example. This budget information will carry forward to all subsequent periods in the following tabs. It only has to be input for the first period. The second inputting action a subrecipient must take, and for all periods following the first period, this is the only inputting action that the subrecipient must take on the voucher tabs, which is to copy the expense data from the expense register summary on tab 1, side B, and transfer it by ESG component into the reimbursement request for the relevant period. This can be done by copying all of the yellow cells for a particular component on tab 1, which I will do now. I'll return to the expense register tab, find rapid rehousing, the relevant component, select all of the yellow cells, which are my summary expenses for the period, and copy those cells. I'll now return to the reimbursement request for the first quarter, the relevant period, find the rapid rehousing component, select the first yellow cell, right-click, and select Paste Values. Now all of the summary expense data has been transferred into the Reimbursement Request tab. Once you have completed the transfer, 3 new sets of data will automatically become available. The final 2 columns of the voucher request will automatically calculate a cumulative total expended amount and a remaining to expend amount. As you complete subsequent voucher requests for subsequent periods, the cumulative and remaining columns will incorporate data from all preceding periods. Additionally, once you have completed the transfer, this operation will also cause the data to be further summarized on side B in the reimbursement summary. Again, the subrecipient only needs to confirm that this summary is accurate. There is no further action required by the subrecipient on side B. As you can see here, now we have a summary, a reimbursement summary completed for rapid rehousing that summarizes the expense data for each of the relevant activity categories. Subrecipients using this tool will want to ensure adequate expense records are maintained on file. Before we turn to a demonstration of the recipient expense tracking tool, we will offer some record keeping recommendations for subrecipients in relation to the subrecipient tool. On the first tab, the expense inputs and the expense summary acts as the staging area to produce key information for the reimbursement request. At the time of quarterly or monthly reimbursement request submissions to the recipient, the expense register inputs should be complete, tab 1, side A, and signed off on for submission. Additionally, there should be backup documentation for each expense included in the register as appropriate given the local policies and procedures. This expense register summary on side B should be transferred into the relevant quarter or period as we just demonstrated and signed off on for submission. At this point, subrecipients should save a version of the file and name it for the submission period. For example, ESG-CV Reimbursement Submission Quarter 1. This will preserve the expense register inputs on tab 1, side A for that quarter, which you will then wipe in the next step for the next period's file. Subrecipients can then immediately save the same file for the subsequent quarter, for example, ESG-CV Reimbursement Submission Quarter 2, and clear out all the individual expenses from the expense register inputs table and resave. You may now start adding expenses as they are incurred for the subsequent quarter or period. When the time comes to close out that quarter and transfer the expense register summary again into the relevant subsequent period, the previous quarter's reimbursement information will be preserved in this file and cumulative expense information will carry forward into subsequent tabs. This process can be repeated at the end of each quarter so that you maintain a full record at the close of each period of both the expense register inputs, which includes the detailed expense data, and the reimbursement request for that quarter before wiping it for use in the subsequent quarter. Following this process will allow you to do the following 3 things. Reset tab 1, which can act as your staging area for expenses in each period. Carry cumulative reimbursement request data forward into subsequent periods, and maintain a complete record of individual and summarized expenses for each period. I will now turn to a demonstration of the recipient tool. The companion tool for recipients is designed to maintain a record of all disbursements made to subrecipients for ESG-CV. It is set up to easily receive information from the subrecipient tool via the reimbursement summary, which is side B of all the voucher request tabs for each period in the subrecipient tool. The recipient tool also allows the recipient to track expenses by quarter for ease of reporting and has a budget dashboard on the second tab to show expenditure progress at a summary level. Tab 1 of the recipient tool, the ESG-CV disbursement ledger, primarily consists of a table where recipients can input and retain information about disbursements made to subrecipients. The table is set up to allow recipients to enter information about an individual disbursement to a subrecipient as one row in the table. Each row has columns that allow the recipient to input information about each disbursement. For a specific disbursement, recipients can input the organization name, a project name, and contract number. For each disbursement, the recipient must select the quarter in which the expense was incurred in order to accurately track expenses by quarter. The recipient can also input a request received date and designate a status for each disbursement. The status indicator allows recipients to add subrecipient request data into the table upon receipt and mark it as pending until the disbursement is issued. Inputting data ahead of the actual disbursement allows for something closer to real-time expense reporting for the ESG-CV quarterly reports if recipients choose to use this tool for that purpose. All of the subsequent columns are organized by ESG component and ESG activity or SAGE category. As you can see here, the component is listed in the top in keeping with the coding of the cells used in the subrecipient tool, and the activity categories are listed below in dark blue. The table continues to the right with each of the components in ESG-CV and their relevant activity categories listed below. The categories and components are designed to match the layout of the reimbursement summary, which is side B of all the voucher and reimbursement request tabs of the subrecipient tool. So the recipients can copy only the green cells for a particular ESG component and transfer them directly into the green cells for that component in the disbursement ledger. Once data is input into the green cells, a subtotal for that component will automatically calculate, as well as an overall total for the disbursement. So here in the example disbursement ledger, we have 6 disbursements recorded. The 6th corresponds with the example that we were viewing in the subrecipient tool. So it does not yet have the expense data for rapid rehousing transferred, but I copied that data out of the summary table in the subrecipient tool and will now select the first cell and paste the values into it so that that expense data is now listed in the recipient tool the same way it was reported in the subrecipient tool. And so it lists then a subtotal for the rapid rehousing component and will also record a disbursement total consistent with the subtotals of each component reported, which in this case is only rapid rehousing. As the recipient inputs disbursement data into the table at the top of the disbursement ledger, quarterly totals will automatically calculate in the quarterly totals table at the bottom of the tab. These quarterly totals will be summarized by ESG component and SAGE activity category in a way that is consistent with the SAGE categories in the ESG-CV quarterly reports. So here in the quarterly totals table, you can see each component with each of its activity categories listed below and a subtotal, which is broken out for quarter 1, 2, 3, 4, and an overall total. So if we turn to rapid rehousing, we see the quarter 4 total, which includes the data that was input in our example and some pre-existing data in this sample for another rapid rehousing disbursement. Additionally, in the recipient tool, there is a second tab which acts as a budget dashboard to track expenditure progress for the recipient's entire grant. This tracks progress for the grant overall and also by ESG component and activity category. To utilize the budget dashboard, the recipient must input the budget information for each grant into the first column. This budget information can be input by activity category for each component, or simply at the more general level of ESG component. As you can see here, for homelessness prevention, budgeted information has been input for activity categories. But if a recipient does not budget at that level of detail, they can include a budget simply for the total for homelessness prevention. After the recipient inputs the budget information, no ongoing inputs are required. The dashboard pulls the remaining expense data from tab 1 and calculates the percentage of funds expended and remaining amounts. So the columns are organized by grant budget, total expended, percentage expended, and remaining. And this information is populated by component. As you can see at the bottom of each component section, you can get a budgeted amount, a total expended, the percentage expended, and the remaining amount, as well as the total for the grant, the entire grant budget, the total expended, the percentage expended, and the remaining grant amount.